Hi there! Welcome to the first official episode of NiHiL. Today is October 31st, 2024, which means today is Halloween, and today is also the kickoff day for the channel. We are going to start it all with this spooky episode all about fear-mongering. Many people, including myself, have had various paranoias throughout our lives about some of what we're covering today. It's this kind of paranoia that has an influence on how we live our lives, the big and small decisions we make, how we see one another, and even how we vote. On my channel, my goal isn't to tell you what to think, but rather to arm you with the mental tools for critical thinking, so you and your loved ones don't have to fall victim to the potential harm that false information can bring. Now, there seems to be something to be afraid of everywhere we look. It can be difficult to parse through some of the claims, and there's no shame in admitting them. Fear-mongering takes many forms, including the three areas we'll be covering today. The supernatural, of course, science, and even politics. I think you'll agree that we shouldn't have to live our lives in fear, even at the subconscious level, nor do we want to be fooled. Frankly, anyone can be fooled, which means even the people we trust can be fooled. And then it gets to you and me, especially when we're given information that strikes fear in our hearts. In this very special episode, I'll walk you through some of the fear-mongering we get from the news, social media, and even our friends and family. By the end of this video, you'll be more equipped to address even the scariest of extraordinary claims like these on your own. And it all starts right now.
There should be no boundaries in human endeavor.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
We're talking about an authority that would give other human beings the right to tell me what to do in the name of God.
Belief is not a choice.
Let's begin by starting on the same page. So what is fear-mongering exactly? As you probably guessed, fear-mongering is the deliberate use of fear to influence people's opinions or actions. It often exaggerates dangers and presents worst-case scenarios as if they are actually going to happen. Here's how to recognize fear-mongering at a glance. The first thing you listen for, of course, is the exaggerated risks, like when they're claiming threats are greater than the evidence actually supports. Fear-mongering, of course, also includes one-sided information, highlighting alarming facts while also completely ignoring balanced viewpoints. Then, of course, there's the emotional manipulation, which is when they're appealing to emotions to bypass rational discussion, making critical thinking less likely. And then lastly, you have the exploitation of uncertainty, when they're playing on our lack of knowledge to make threats feel more imminent. Now, I'm willing to bet that at least one example has already crossed your mind. Maybe you've heard people say things like, "There's a demon that watches me sleep. Your phone is emitting radiation and giving you cancer. It won't be long before they try to take our guns." This kind of language is actually compelling for many because it immediately taps into our fears and anxieties. Presenting claims this way doesn't provide evidence. Instead, it makes us react emotionally, which can make us believe the claim more readily. When someone tries to convince you of something by targeting your feelings rather than presenting concrete proof, that's called an appeal to emotion fallacy. This kind of fallacy doesn't help us find truth. It just plays on our fears. It would probably be more helpful if we cleared up what a fallacy is. The term fallacy, simply put, is a mistake in reasoning. A fallacy isn't a wrong answer, but a fallacy is essentially bad logic, and will eventually, often immediately, lead you to an incorrect conclusion. There are many kinds of fallacies, and each one of them has a name, but just knowing how to spot one is very beneficial, and can even protect you in many ways. So I will be sure to cover them more in the future. The appeal to emotion fallacy will be a reoccurring item today, so be sure to keep an eye out for that one and other forms of unsound logic. Now that we've covered some of the terms you'll hear throughout the video, I want to take this time to remind you this video will have three sections: science being the longest one, the supernatural, and politics. Though this section we're about to get into will be going into the most depth, as this will help us with addressing other kinds of fear-mongering. Let's get started with our first chapter, science, or in this case, pseudo-science. Pseudo-science. That term might sound self-explanatory, but let's break down what separates it from real science. Science is a systematic approach to understanding the natural world through observation, experimentation, and reasoning. It involves forming hypotheses, testing through experiments, analyzing data, and drawing conclusions based on evidence. True science stays open to new evidence and aims to build reliable, consistent knowledge about how the universe works. That's why I love it. Pseudoscience, on the other hand, may look like science, but it skips the rigor. It often relies on untestable claims, cherry-picked data, and personal testimony rather than controlled, reproducible experiments. It resists change when faced with conflicting evidence and is more about affirming pre-existing beliefs than seeking objective understanding. But it's important to remember that many people who spread pseudoscientific claims mean well. They're often genuinely concerned and believe they're warning you about real dangers. It's easy to be misinformed, and even very intelligent people can fall for believing things that aren't true. These beliefs are often out of a sincere concern for loved one's safety. I have to imagine if I was somehow convinced that blueberries were poisonous, I'd probably start warning everyone not to eat them. These beliefs are often spread with good intentions, even though they can still cause harm when they're wrong. Now, of course, there are people who spread misinformation intentionally, sometimes to sell products or make a living. So, if pseudoscience isn't based on solid evidence, where do these ideas come from? Let's explore a major example of scientific phobia, the fear of EMFs. From warnings about cell phones causing cancer to conspiracy theories around 5G, fear of EMFs, or electromagnetic fields, has grown. Some believe that invisible waves from our devices are silently harming us. But is this fear scientifically justified? First, let's break down what EMFs actually are. EMF, or electromagnetic radiation, is the energy emitted from wireless tech like cell phones, Bluetooth devices, laptops, Wi-Fi routers, radio towers, cell towers. Many worry that constant exposure to these EMFs can cause health issues, ranging from headaches and fatigue to more serious conditions like cancer. Since EMF is another term for radiation, cancer concerns are understandable, even if some of the other claims sound far-fetched. When you hear radiation, harmless probably isn't the first word that comes to mind. So, should we be worried? Or at least maybe try to reduce our exposure? At the start of this video, I mentioned my own paranoia about EMFs. Growing up, I didn't know the term EMF, but I had seen clips that had sparked a lasting fear of wireless radiation. Watching those, I became convinced I needed to keep my distance from devices like cell phones and radios, even developing habits to limit my exposure. For example, I'd keep my phone away from my head, sleep with devices at least 3 feet away, and avoid wireless headphones, leading to some painful moments with earbuds, especially when I was mowing and yanking the cord on accident. These small steps became part of my life, subconsciously influencing me even into adulthood. So what's the truth behind these fears? Turns out, radiation is actually more complex and more familiar than it might seem. Let's start with something simple: visible light. Believe it or not, light is a type of radiation. It's part of the spectrum that includes radio waves, microwaves, infrared, ultraviolet, X-rays, and gamma rays. The only actual difference between these types of radiation is their wavelength and energy, which determine how they interact with matter. Any idea what kind of radiation those anti-EMF gadgets claim to protect you from? Keep that question in mind. We'll come back to it. Now that we understand what visible light is and how it relates to other forms of radiation, let's explore the discovery of the electromagnetic spectrum, starting with light. In the 1600s, Isaac Newton discovered that every color of the rainbow, in order starting with red, then orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and ending with violet, were components of white light. He demonstrated that white light could be split into all its component colors using a prism, and even joined them back together into white light by the same means. Now, Isaac Newton didn't know what we currently understand about light, but thanks to his experiments, His discovery was what laid out the foundation for later understanding the electromagnetic spectrum. As you know, we use light for seemingly everything. Even in nature, it seems to be the greatest, healthiest, most natural thing ever, even with the knowledge that it's a form of radiation. But like anything else, too much can actually be bad. And I don't just mean when it messes with your sleep schedule. I'm talking about burning your retinas, or even concentrating a bunch of it into a single point to light things on fire. That is the danger and the power of light. Fast forward to the year 1800, William Herschel was a scientist repeating Isaac Newton's experiment, but with the curiosity of whether the different colors had different temperatures. One color at a time, he placed thermometers in each color of the refracted light. He placed a thermometer just past the red part of the spectrum where no light was visible, expecting it to simply be the same temperature as the rest of the room, with no increase. He did this so that he could compare the temperature of the colors to the room temperature. But, to his surprise, the temperature of the control thermometer rose higher than all the other colors. Through further experimentation, Herschel realized that there must be another type of light beyond the red, a hotter one, which we cannot see. This was the discovery of infrared light, or IR for short. We use infrared today for things like night vision, remote controls, and stovetops. Just a year later, in 1801, electrochemist Johann Wilhelm Ritter heard about Herschel's discovery of infrared, and he wanted to repeat the prism experiment in hopes of finding something at the opposite end of the spectrum, like an opposite cooling radiation. Ritter initially tried to detect invisible rays beyond the violet end of the spectrum using thermometers. However, the thermometers showed no significant temperature increase in the region beyond the violet, unlike in the infrared region. So, he shifted his approach to looking for photochemical reactions. He knew that the chemical silver chloride was a chemical that darkened when exposed to light. Surely enough, when the silver chloride was placed in the invisible part of the spectrum past the violet, the reaction was much faster and more evident when exposed to the invisible radiation just beyond the violet end of the spectrum. This was the discovery of what would soon be called ultraviolet light, or UV. We use ultraviolet today for sanitation, dentistry, forensics, and black lights for cool parties. I love black lights. So freaking cool. Alright, so far we've explored visible light, infrared, and ultraviolet radiation. But why is it called the electromagnetic spectrum? When I first dug into this, I wondered, if it's all radiation, why add the electromagnetic part? Let's explore that with the next part of the spectrum, radio waves. In the mid-1800s, electricity, magnetism, and light were studied as separate fields. Then, in the 1860s, physicist James Clerk Maxwell aimed to unify them. Building on earlier experiments showing that changing magnetic fields could create electric currents, and vice versa, Maxwell believed these forces were interconnected. He wanted to prove that they weren't separate phenomena, but two sides of the same coin. To do this, Maxwell developed a groundbreaking set of 4 equations, now known as the Maxwell equations, describing how electric and magnetic fields interact. These equations revealed that changing electric magnetic fields could sustain each other as they traveled through space as waves. When Maxwell calculated their speed, he was stunned to find that it matched the speed of light. This led him to realize that light itself was an electromagnetic wave, sparking the theory of electromagnetism and suggesting other invisible forms of electromagnetic radiation might also exist. Maxwell's theory unified visible light, infrared, and ultraviolet as forms of electromagnetic radiation, all varying by wavelength and energy. His insights paved the way for discovering the rest of the electromagnetic spectrum, from radio waves to gamma waves. Heinrich Hertz confirmed Maxwell's predictions in 1887 by generating and detecting radio waves, or RF. Hertz used a spark gap transmitter to produce high-frequency electromagnetic waves, which we now know as radio waves. Hertz showed that these waves had all the properties predicted by Maxwell, that they could be reflected, refracted, and interfered with, just like light, demonstrating the existence of other electromagnetic radiations. Radio waves, as you're already aware, are used to wirelessly transmit information over distances by radio towers and satellites. And guess what? Radio waves are utilized by your cell phone, your Wi-Fi, and all your wireless technology. Radio waves are even used for NFC functions on your phone, RFID technology in your debit card, and even wireless charging pads for your favorite modern tech. So after Hertz's work, scientists began the exploration of the spectrum of electromagnetic waves, leading to the realization that there were different wavelengths and frequencies. Microwaves fall in the electromagnetic spectrum between radio waves and infrared radiation, but they're essentially high-frequency radio waves. Now, it should be known that they're commonly distinguished from radio waves because of the different technology used to access them. Soon after the discovery of radio waves, though, came the discovery of X-rays by Wilhelm Röntgen in 1895, when he was experimenting with a type of cathode ray tube, a device that shoots electrons, and he noticed that a nearby screen started to glow even though it wasn't in direct contact with the tube. Röntgen realized that some invisible rays were causing this effect, and he named them X-rays, because their nature was unknown at this time. Today, we use X-rays for many things, like in the field of medicine, security, and even inspecting welds on piping. Lastly, just 5 years after the discovery of X-rays, came the discovery of gamma. Gamma rays were discovered in 1900 while studying radioactive materials. Gamma can be found on the same side of the electromagnetic spectrum as X-ray and UV. Like X-rays and some ultraviolet, this is also a high-energy wave, but this one is the smallest wavelength, and is the most energetic and most penetrative of any wave in the electromagnetic spectrum, and can also be the most dangerous of all. Still, we have many uses for gamma waves, like astronomy and even treating cancer. The discoveries of the electromagnetic spectrum have absolutely revolutionized our understanding of nature and how these different forms of waves interact with matter. We've also come to a better understanding of how some forms of radiation, like ultraviolet, X-rays, and gamma rays, have been directly linked to cancer due to their DNA damaging potential. With so much information to take in, it makes sense that there is some confusion and fear about radiation as a whole. Obviously, we now know that radiation is a pretty vague term in this context. Still, we know some kinds of radiation are dangerous. So, does that apply to all radiation? We still haven't arrived at a clear understanding as to how these fears came about, but thankfully, we do have a good idea as to where these fears come from, and even how valid these fears are. The history of fear-mongering around EMF and radiation spans over a century, and reflects public anxiety about new technologies and their potential health effects. Let's finally understand why. After the discoveries of X-rays and gamma rays, fascination with invisible rays grew. X-rays were even used in shoe stores, and radium found its way into products like watches and cosmetics. By the 1920s, however, the dangers of radiation became pretty clear, and particularly with cases like the Radium Girls, who suffered radiation poisoning after reports of X-ray burns and cancers. During World War II and the Cold War, atomic bomb tests heightened radiation fears, reflected in movies like Godzilla. This period sparked widespread anxiety about radiation's harmful effects on health and the environment. The 1980s brought new fears and reports linked to EMF exposure, from power lines to health issues like childhood leukemia. Some individuals also reported symptoms like headaches and fatigue from devices, though studies found no conclusive evidence supporting these effects. Similarly, the rise of mobile technology sparked concerns about RF radiation, though organizations, like the World Health Organization, repeatedly found no link between non-ionizing radiation and health dangers. With the introduction of 5G, misinformation intensified, spawning conspiracy theories and public fears about cancer immune issues, and even COVID-19. This fueled protests and vandalism of 5G towers, even though science shows no health risk from typical non-ionizing radiation exposure levels. Radiophobia, rooted in fear of the unseen and distrust of authority, is amplified by media and social platforms. Misinterpretations of scientific studies continue to fuel public anxieties about non-ionizing radiation. Yet, while ionizing radiation does pose genuine risk, concerns over non-ionizing sources are baseless. Let's finally debunk these myths and clarify why EMF fears about everyday devices like Wi-Fi, phones, and 5G have no scientific basis. So, as we talked about before, when we're talking about the fears around EMFs, the core of the fear is around wireless technology. Your cell phone, your Wi-Fi devices, all your wireless tech. In terms of radiation and radioactivity, they are all perfectly safe. In truth, they absolutely do emit radiation. However, they are not radioactive, nor are they made with radioactive materials. You can have your phone in your pocket all day, every day, and you will never get cancer from doing that, nor will you pop any popcorn kernels with your cell phone. Let me explain why. We've already learned that all forms of electromagnetic waves are radiation by definition, including light. What we haven't really covered is that there are two kinds of radiation in terms of ionization. One half of the spectrum is considered non-ionizing. The other is ionizing. To understand the real danger of cancer from radiation, we need to understand the difference between ionizing and non-ionizing. Ionizing refers to the ability of radiation to remove electrons from atoms or molecules, thereby creating ions. When radiation has enough energy to knock electrons off atoms, it turns a neutral atom into a positively charged ion, and this process is called ionization. Ionizing radiation has sufficient energy to break chemical bonds, which can lead to cellular damage in living organisms, and thus be able to cause cancer. Non-ionizing radiation refers to radiation that does not carry enough energy to remove electrons from atoms or molecules, meaning it can't ionize at all, which is what can cause cancer. Instead, non-ionizing radiation can only excite atoms or molecules, which may result in heating up what is exposed if you have enough exposure. That's essentially what heating up is. And well, that's all it can really do in terms of danger. In other words, there is no cancer risk from these types of radiation. Your phone, your wireless headphones, your Wi-Fi, all use radio waves. They will not give you cancer. So, radio, microwave, infrared, and visible light are all non-ionizing forms of radiation that might be able to warm you up if you concentrated it enough. You might warm up by a degree or two under a 5G tower from radio radiation. You might burn your leftover pizza in the microwave. You might burn your hand on your infrared stovetop. And you just might ruin your retinas from winning that sun staring contest. But cancer? It's never going to happen from these types of radiation. There is a gray area to this, specifically in ultraviolet. Now, ultraviolet radiation is divided into three main types based on wavelength: UVA, UVB, and UVC. Each type has distinct properties and effects on living organisms. Here's a breakdown of each type. UVA. This wavelength of UV causes skin aging and contributes to skin cancer, penetrating deeply into the skin. Now, you can find this band emitted from black lights, but don't worry. The energy levels aren't enough to cause any real harm. In moderate exposures. Still, you shouldn't spend every night under a black light because this is still UVA we're talking about, and too much can eventually lead to unwanted skin damage. Then we have UVB. This one is what causes sunburn and plays a significant role in skin cancer. It affects the outer layer of the skin, and a little bit can actually be good for you, in moderation. Finally, we get to UVC. This one is dangerous, but thankfully, it is mostly absorbed by the atmosphere. We do, however, use this in sterilization, including drinking water. But don't worry, even though this utilizes UVC, this method of sanitizing is incapable of making anything radioactive or leaving behind any radioactive material. Remember, we use X-ray and even gamma rays for medical purposes, and these are more ionizing than UV. Used correctly, and even waves like these can be safe. Still, gamma rays, X-rays, and ultraviolet rays in high enough doses do have the ability to cause cancer. Thankfully, the risks of each of these are generally understood well enough to be used safely and effectively, and that goes for non-ionizing radiation too. Now that we have a better understanding of what radiation is and how it works, we can start addressing the products designed to block what some call EMF waves. As you may recall from earlier, the term EMF refers to quite the range of electromagnetic frequencies, from low-frequency radio waves to high-frequency X-rays and gamma rays, the whole 9 yards. To even block EMF, you need materials that can absorb or reflect radiation across these frequencies, which stickers are not designed to do. The stickers marketed for EMF protection are made of thin materials that can't actually alter EMF waves at all. Just consider astronauts and spacecraft in space. They're constantly exposed to high levels of high-energy electromagnetic waves from the sun and other cosmic objects. Protecting astronauts and equipment from these waves require heavy shielding, using specialized materials, dense metals, and multi-layered systems just to absorb or deflect radiation. And even with this kind of advanced engineering, blocking EMF waves is still a challenge. The complexity and power of this radiation simply can't be stopped with something as trivial as a sticker. To even block frequencies like these to any effective degree, you would need at least metal enclosures or conductive fabrics. And even effective products like RFID wallets are only effective against a very specific range of radio waves. In other words, EMF blocking stickers don't do jack squat. In conclusion, it seems that the EMF blocking sticker salesman is either profiting from people's misunderstandings or might be clueless himself. Possibly both. Either way, we can confidently say that these stickers won't offer any real protection. It's a scam. An effective one that actively fools at least tens of thousands of people today. Much like other scammers, major religions, and political campaigns, if they can make you fear something only they claim to protect you from, you become dependent on them, allowing them to thrive on your fear, your money, and your unwavering loyalty, keeping you locked into their promises and agendas indefinitely. If you've been living with a subconscious fear of radiation, today's the day you get to break those chains. To wrap up this chapter, we learned that our phones and our wireless tech are safe, but that there are also types of radiation that are dangerous for our biology. Too much of anything can be bad for us, of course, but the RFs from our phones and wireless tech, they're as harmless as radiation can get. As long as you're mindful of your sun exposure and use sunscreen, there's little to worry about. In fact, the infrared radiation emitted from just your partner's body heat alone is arguably more concerning than any radiation you'll ever receive from the phones and Wi-Fi in your home or business. You and I can talk to our loved ones through our favorite Bluetooth headsets all day, free of any fears of EMFs. If you want to simply be safe from radiation, don't jump in front of any nukes or eat off grandma's glowing uranium glassware. Don't stare at the sun. Wear sunscreen when you're going to be outside for a while. You're gonna be just fine. What's great about this approach we took to debunk pseudo-scientific falsehoods is that it can serve as a model for addressing all kinds of claims, by relying on the evidence, asking questions, and distinguishing between fear-driven narratives and well-established knowledge, we empower ourselves to break down all kinds of misinformation, whether it's a pseudo-scientific scam or even the supernatural, like learning you're in a haunted house or that you've been hexed by someone with a grudge. The key is skepticism, critical thinking, careful research, and most of all, an honest desire to understand. Speaking of spooky stuff, it's about time we get into the fun spooky part of this Halloween special. The supernatural. You've heard it all before. Ouija boards, possessions, haunted houses, demon-infested backroads, cursed objects, hexes, dark energy. The list goes on. For centuries, tales like these have been a source of both thrill and terror, captivating imaginations and keeping people awake at night. But fear-mongering around the supernatural has often been more than just entertainment. It's been used to influence beliefs, enforce behaviors, and sometimes even to control people. The supernatural is an easy arena for fear tactics because it involves forces that lie beyond our senses, feeding on our deepest uncertainties and our primal fears. Whether it's a curse from a psychic or warnings of spirits that watch over and judge our every move, the allure of the unknown has a way of gripping people tightly. And like with pseudo-scientific fear-mongering, supernatural fear tactics can make us dependent on the people or products that claim to keep us safe from those forces. In fear-mongering around the supernatural, there is a powerful appeal to fear fallacy, a method of using fear to bypass critical thinking and provoke emotional response. This tactic, which overlaps with the broader appeal to emotion fallacy, plays on our anxieties, making fear itself seem like proof of the supernatural. But as we know from the argument from ignorance fallacy, just because something is unknown doesn't mean it's proof of ghosts or spirits. If we can't explain a strange sound in the night, that's not evidence of paranormal activity. It's simply something we don't yet understand. Take ghost sightings, for example. These stories follow a familiar script. Lights flickering, objects moving on their own, a cold chill in the air. But we have to ask, why would a ghost care to do that? Why knock on walls or flip light switches when they could do something substantial like warn of future dangers or help solve complex crimes? And why are ghostly actions so inconsistent? If spirits can move objects, why aren't they designing solutions for world hunger, networking with the living, or making appearances in court or Zoom calls to resolve court cases? And for that matter, if ghosts exist and manifest in reality, why is it always humans or somebody's pet dog? While I'm grateful that my yard isn't haunted by a pair of procreating plesiosaurs or mollusks that had unfinished business from 500 million years ago, it begs the question as to why it's almost always a story about something being haunted by humans or demons or anything else only a human could come up with. When talking about these claims, we should really try to understand what they are talking about. And you can just ask simple questions, even goofy questions like the ones we asked. And a lot of the time, it quickly becomes easy to deconstruct or even to completely dismiss these ideas. Because a lot of the time, the explanation is just, well, what else could it be? This brings us to the false dichotomy fallacy, often present in supernatural claims. A false dichotomy is a logical fallacy that frames two opposing options as if they're the only possible choices, dismissing other viable alternatives. In other words, it's when someone says it's either X or Y, while ignoring other explanations that may exist. This tactic simplifies complex issues or manipulates choices by making them seem like the only two extremes are possible. For instance, consider the statement, either ghosts exist or there's no way to explain what happened. This is a clear false dichotomy. In reality, many explanations might account for unusual experiences, from a creaky house to a trick of the light, but a false dichotomy sidesteps these possibilities, nudging us towards a particular, often more dramatic conclusion. This fallacy often narrows our thinking and plays on emotions, especially fear, pushing us to choose from limited options without considering more realistic alternatives. The truth is, we have plenty of grounded explanations for strange experiences that don't involve the supernatural at all. Cultural beliefs play a huge role in shaping what we interpret as paranormal, with ghosts being understood differently across societies. Some see them as benevolent protectors, others as vengeful spirits. These cultural differences should make us wonder, if ghostly experiences vary so drastically based on where we're from, how can any one interpretation be accurate? Many supernatural claims rely on the idea of a soul or consciousness that lingers after death. But scientific research into the brain shows us that memory, identity, and personality all arise from our physical brain structures. While someone claims to see or feel a spirit, how do they know it's not just their own mind processing stimuli in a unique way? After all, there's no scientific basis for believing a soul detaches from our bodies after death to roam freely. Even the famous story about the soul having weight upon death has long been debunked, yet it persists as part of ghost lore. Imagine a thought experiment for a moment. If humanity had never conceived of ghosts, how would we explain strange occurrences? Without our cultural lens, maybe we chalk them up to magnetic fields, sleep disorders, or simply the brain playing tricks on us. Without a pre-existing belief in spirits, it's likely we'd search for tangible explanations instead of supernatural ones. And crucially, the lack of an explanation doesn't mean something magical is at play. Instead, it means we have more to learn. Engaging with questions can also help reveal what's behind supernatural claims. Instead of asking, "What's causing this haunting?" try asking, "How do we know this isn't something else?" Like a draft, or a creaking pipe, or our own mind at work. These types of questions challenge assumptions without dismissing anyone's experience. And when we ask these questions, we find that most paranormal experiences have simple, earthly explanations. Rather than attributing mysterious sounds to wandering souls, we can look to our environment, our brains, or our cultural conditioning for answers. Let's not forget that supernatural beliefs often have imaginative, alternative explanations too. If ghosts exist, why not wizards, aliens, or ancient deities influencing our daily lives? You know? Though they seem silly, the questions remind us to keep an open mind while being grounded in reality. In the end, simply asking more questions without jumping to conclusions help us keep a healthy skepticism that protects us from fear-mongering and opens us up to learning about the world in all its complexity. It's nice to know what kind of questions to ask, though, too. Personally, I like the epistemological approach, where you're asking the what, why, and how questions, where you're essentially acting as their intellectual mirror. The what questions help clarify what they actually believe, the why questions help to understand why they think that, and the how questions help to understand the process as to how they got to their conclusion, or even better, how you can arrive at the same conclusion as them. This epistemological method not only aids in understanding others, but also encourages self-reflection. After all, if we discover we're mistaken about something, wouldn't we want to know? It's about fostering dialogue and reaching a shared understanding. Now, this same pattern of fear-mongering doesn't just happen in fake science and the supernatural. It extends into the political realm as well. Just as with ghosts and other fantastical ideas, political narratives often exploit fear to manipulate beliefs and actions. Let's explore how fear is wielded in politics and the implications it has for our society. Let me clarify. We are not here to discuss specific policies or political candidates. That's the kind of thing for another time. But since it's election season, It's the perfect opportunity to address fear-mongering in the political sphere. Still, this video is getting a bit long, so I'll make this section short and sweet. Because, after all, politics can feel exhausting, stressful, and just plain uninteresting, so it's understandable why some people avoid it altogether. It may not seem relevant until it directly affects us or our loved ones. It's important to recognize that people generally have many reasons for how they vote. Personal values, religious beliefs, economic concerns, key issues that hit close to home, and so on. But another major factor influencing people and how they vote is, of course, fear-mongering. Especially in news sources that might promote certain narratives or candidates for profit, this kind of emotional persuasion can lead people to vote based on fear rather than informed choice, and it's crucial to recognize these tactics. Fear-mongering in politics often manifests through sensationalized media coverage, targeted advertisements, and emotionally charged rhetoric. Politicians and their supporters may exploit societal anxieties, be it about crime, immigration, or economic stability, to create a sense of urgency and fear. This tactic effectively narrows the choices presented to voters, framing the political landscape in black and white terms. If you don't support a particular candidate or policy, you're effectively endorsing chaos or danger. Consider how often we hear phrases like, "Vote for us to save your family," or "Without our policies, everything you know will fall apart." These kind of statements not only oversimplify complex issues, but also evoke very deep and negative emotions, compelling people to vote against their better judgment or preferred candidate out of fear. It's a strategy that relies on our instincts instead of our critical thinking and informed decision-making. Moreover, fear-mongering in the media can lead to polarization within society as individuals retreat into echo chambers where their fears are validated rather than challenged. This division makes meaningful discourse nearly impossible, perpetuating a cycle where fear dictates behavior and beliefs. Thankfully, by covering pseudoscience and the supernatural earlier, you now have an understanding of what fallacies are, what kind of fallacies to look for, like the appeal to fear and false dichotomies. You now have the tools for recognizing these tactics and navigating nonsense in all areas, including the political landscape, and even engaging in discussions that prioritize understanding over fear by using an honest, open, and epistemological approach. The most important thing when you want to have a productive conversation with someone about something that's controversial, like politics, is finding middle ground. Because that may be one of the best ways to really understand where someone is coming from when they have an opinion or deeply held belief that contradicts your own. We are only human. And when we start at that understanding that we're human beings that share the same reality, that we want a world with less suffering, you're already off to a good start. We then apply the logical tools we discussed earlier, and when we commit to this process, we not only uncover the truth and learn something new, but we also build a more informed and rational worldview. On that note, that's all I've got for you today. I want to thank you for joining me on the very first episode of NiHiL. Making this has been a big learning experience for me. In my mind, episode 1 should represent what this channel will be. Sincerely, I'm glad you're here for it. Remember to ask questions, embrace love, and be skeptical of extraordinary claims. This has been NiHiL. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. And happy Halloween. Bye-bye.